So just a very, very short briefing on what MCTAC is. We're the Managed Care Technical Assistance Center, and we're working with New York State OMH and OASAS and DOH and others to really provide kind of comprehensive technical assistance for the transition to managed care. So we're out there doing lots of trainings. We've hit about 70% of OMH providers and about 55% of all the OASAS providers out there already. So if this is the first time you're hearing of us, you will be added to our mailing list, and we'll very shortly start getting lots of emails from us as well. There are a number of other trainings which are also available either simultaneously to this or will be available shortly that I just want to point you towards. If you're a health home care manager, one of the things you're going to have to do between now and October to start delivering health home care management assessments is the Inter-I assessment training, and that's available through OMH, and I believe the links are on our MCTAC.org website. In addition to that, we have done some training on June 15th in the slides, and the slides are up on our website now on how one gets eligible for HCBS services. So I recommend that folks go take a look at that workflow and just start to think through how that'll work within their services. And then we'll also do training and a more in-depth version of this. So if you think of this at 30,000 feet, we'll get down at 5,000 feet. In the fall, for New York City in particular, we'll be doing training on in-person training on each of the HCBS services and in their clusters. That training will probably roll out in October, November, and December prior to HCBS services going live in January. So we're not going to cover some of those granular level details today, but we will get into those granular level details in that training. And then for the health home care managers who are on the call today, we will be doing specific HCBS plan of care training in the fall to really think through how one assigns individual, how the assessment works, how the assessment then flows into a plan of care, and how somebody actually ends up receiving HCBS services. So we're going to keep this again, and I know that Joe and Brenda will say this as well, but we're going to keep this today at a very high level and really kind of keep away from some of the real granular questions because those will be answered in other settings. But we really want to give people as much information as we know now so that we can kind of make sure that folks have the opportunity to start to implement this into their existing programming and start to think through where they're going to go as a system. We anticipate that the actual presentation portion of the talk today will go between about 60 minutes, maybe a little more than that, so we should have between 15 and 30 minutes for questions at the end. Please chat in your questions as they come to you throughout the webinar. Morgan in the background is going to be cutting and pasting those into a document for me, and then when we get to the question and answers portion of the training, we will read those questions out and answer as many of them as humanly possible. I will also say one additional thing when it comes to questions, particularly policy-level questions that are geared towards the state. Answers are not official until they come out in the frequently asked questions doc that we'll work with the state in the background on. And a couple other things, the slides for today's webinar are actually already on our website at MCTAC.org underneath the HCBS services section. And that's it's under the HCBS services section. One question just came in, actually, I just want to answer now. These are not, but this webinar is really primarily designed for adult HCBS services. If you're a kids-only provider, it may be beneficial just in terms of getting a sense of how these services are rolling out in the adult side, but it will not be addressing children's HCBS services at this point. That will happen later on as we get closer. And then in addition to that, just a couple other things. The slides are on the MCTAC. It's under the events page. The slides are available under the events page on MCTAC.org. You can access those slides now if you want them on, kind of in front of you to take notes. In addition to that, you can also sign up for all the additional HCBS services rolling out over the course of the month. And I think I have hit all the kind of logistical issues today. Again, please feel free to chat in your questions as we go, as they come to you, so you don't forget them, and we'll go through as many of them as humanly possible at the end before we wrap up. And be mindful that this is kind of the high-level overview and won't get into a tremendous amount of granularity. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Joe Swinford from OMH, and he and Brenda Harris-Collins from OASAS are going to walk us through the next section of the webinar, really, on the policy issues as well. So, Joe, if you'll just accept the baton, And if we can unmute Brenda as well, and then they will get started. Thanks so much.
Okay, let me just check, make sure. Brenda, are you, did we get you unmuted?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. So just by way of introduction, as Gary said, sorry. I'm thinking about my boss. Sorry about that, guys. I'm Joe Swinford. I am the Director of Stakeholder Engagement, for previously the Deputy Director of Recipient Affairs, and have done a lot of work with the peer services here in New York State, as well as in other states and nationally. And Brenda, you want to take just a moment and introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Brenda Harris-Collins, and I work with OASIS with the Practice Innovation and Care Management Division, and I've been working with peer services for about 7 years and the development of peer services in New York State for OASIS. So I'm very happy to be on board for today in this presentation.
Great. And if you look at the list on your slide there, we have a number of HCBS services. As Andy said, we're going to go over all of these at this 30,000-foot level over the next month. But today we want to start out with this particular one, which is listed as Empowerment Services, Peer Support. And by way of background, I wanted to emphasize something that Andy had mentioned earlier. We want to keep today focused on this sort of discrete peer service called peer support. There's a number of peer support services available in the system now that are not changing. OMH puts a lot of money into state-funded and local government-funded peer support services. Those are not changing. Those don't depend on whether somebody is in a managed care plan or eligible for HCBS services. Those will continue as is. There is also a lot of peer services available in the state plan on the OASIS side through the clinic, through the OASIS clinics, and they already have that in. Brenda, I'm not sure you guys have a lot actually going on in that, but you do have the authority to do that. That is correct, right?
APG. Correct.
Right, through the APGs, and that will get rolled into the mainstream plans. And then also you have the ability for any of the mainstream plans to do in lieu of any of the services they have and provide peer support services that way. So those three buckets of peer support services are not what we want to focus on today. What we want to focus on today is this discrete category within the HCBS services called peer support. What we are trying to accomplish, not just in this service, although this service is very much aimed at this, but we're trying to accomplish overall with the HCBS services really is to promote a recovery-oriented system. And by recovery, we mean people establishing a life in the community. The HCBS services are intended to be specialty services that will wrap around the individual and help give them the support and assistance they need to live a life in the community as opposed to a life in some sort of institutional setting. So we really want these services to be seen as additive to what we're doing now, not something that's sort of a rehash of something that's already going on, but really a new approach to services. And when it comes to these HCBS peer services, we really are looking at something that is designed to help people build their social capital, build their connectedness to non-disabled peers in the community, and really help build their for lack of a better term, their social identity and their role in the community so that they can move on and function much more like a non-disabled individual in the community, but still having that safety net of a peer to wrap around them. We'll go over a number of the components here in just a few minutes. We'll also go over the billing rules as well as some examples. But before we proceed, I want to be really clear that we've got those buckets of peer support services that are available to people that are not eligible for HCBS services. We also have peers that will be working in the system at all different levels. We have peers that may be working as a case manager. We have peers that may be working in some other role. Those are roles that are separate from what we're talking about now. Those are roles where you bring your lived experience to the table, but you're doing a different role. Much as if you were a social worker and your job title is, for example, an administrator, you still bring your social work background with you when you come into that new role, but you're not functioning as a social worker. So peers that work in the system in other roles bring that lived experience, and that's a great experience to bring to the table, but it's not the service we're talking about here. Here we're talking about that discrete peer support service that we're going to outline in the definition. Brenda, did you want to add anything to sort of that global picture?
Yes, just for OASIS and the vision for OASIS, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that we're looking forward to these services and HCBS services to really reach individuals who were traditionally difficult to reach in our system, those who we may not have in our programs. So it's important to note that SUD individuals experience many deficits, and these services will benefit them and these type of interventions. So we're excited about these type of services, and we just want to make sure that we are focused on this particular discrete service as we move forward.
Great. So let's move on to our next slide. We went through a designation process for HCBS providers, and you can see on this slide how many providers we had in the various categories. For peer support services, out of 171 agencies that were designated for at least one service, 113 of those are designated to provide peer support services. We've got a lot of new agencies kind of coming into the fold of providing peer support services. Some of these may have provided similar services in the past, but as we move into this, we really want to make sure we're all looking at these services in order to provide them in the same, from the same mindset and the same vision. Andy, this is moving a little, there we go. Don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide, but we do want to point out that peer support services can be billed in combination with many of the other services that are available, such as clinic on either OASIS or OMH, PROS, and other services you see on the list. There is one exception, however, and that's OMH ACT teams. ACT teams are a discrete service unto themselves, and they, by nature of the team design, have a peer support component embedded in the program. So that's the reason that you don't have the ability in this column here in the middle for OMH ACT to bill for peer services. But all the others you can bill for peer services as an additive service on top of what they're already providing. So let's talk about recovery for just a minute. And Brenda, I want you to kind of chime in also as sort of your vision from OASIS about recovery, because when you ask somebody what to define recovery, you're probably going to get lots of different definitions, everything from people saying sort of that medical idea of, well, you had it but you don't have it anymore. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about abstinence on the addiction side. And I think SAMHSA's definition gives us a good starting point. It's the process of change that individuals improve their health and wellness to live a self-directed life and strive to reach their full potential. Some of my peers will say it's getting a life. It's having a role other than being a mental health patient or an SUD patient. It's about having a social role that you choose in the community that builds on your full potential and you direct, that is a healthy and wellness-based life for you in the community. Brenda, I know you guys from OASIS have some also concerns that we make sure that folks don't sort of go off thinking recovery is something other than what we're talking about here.
Correct. So one of the things that's important and really important around recovery and the definition of recovery is understanding that there are many pathways to recovery, especially in addiction, and there is a basis of respect that comes through recovery, this recovery, especially recovery-oriented system of care, that we respect the respect for all, respect for protecting rights of all, eliminating stigma and discrimination for someone who has addiction. So no matter whether the person is in a medicated assisted treatment process, harm reduction, they may have some type of spiritual deliverance, or they may have come through some other pathway that we may not typically acknowledge in our treatment system. We respect many pathways, and that it affects the holistic, and we're looking at the whole life of the person and not just one specific area. And it's important to really encapsulate the person and is culturally competent, and it addresses trauma. And we know that for many of our persons that are a part of the OASIS system, trauma is a real big part of what they go through and needs to be addressed. So we're looking at really addressing many of the areas that we haven't before been able to address, but to be able, through this recovery-oriented system of care, really look at the whole person in a holistic way.
And I think trauma is also something that we share an interest in the OMH side of things, because we're beginning to see more and more of the research pointing to trauma-informed approaches being very helpful on the mental health side as well. So we're looking at that as well. But it's really good that we're starting this HCBS series with the peer support services, because they are integral when you think about recovery, and recovery-oriented approach is what we're looking at for all of the HCBS services, and really what we're trying to change our system overall to, and that we focus on helping individuals have a healthy, wellness-based life in the community that they direct and that promotes their full potential. So let's look at sort of how we've structured these peer support services. They have, as we've mentioned, a recovery focus, but they also have a rehabilitative focus. One of the main goals here is to help individuals who have experienced mental illness or addiction issues to rebuild, in some cases maybe even build initially, what is their role in community, what is their ability to move their life forward. And so the peer, because they walk that life, and we talk about, we'll use the term later often, shared lived experience, for the peer who has walked that, that's their stock in trade. They don't bring a clinical focus to the table. They bring a focus that is based on, here's the experience that I've had in recovery and rehabilitation. As Brenda said, all paths are different. Yours may be different, but we share a common goal, and that's the common walk of recovery. One way to sort of frame this is it is much more like the way a minister would approach their faith community, because they approach their faith community as having a shared walk of their particular faith practice. Here, the peer approaches the other peer based on the shared walk of rehabilitation and recovery. So always kind of keep that in the back of your mind when you're thinking about recovery services. They're not a sort of rehash of any of the psych rehab services. They are different because you're not approaching it from a scientific shared learn perspective, but you're approaching it from a mutuality and a common understanding of that shared walk of recovery. We want to promote their ability to cope and learn to manage your behavioral health symptoms, and as you begin to connect with peer services, and that peer services help you connect within the larger community, you now have a reason to motivate you to do this. So peers can help other peers learn some of the tools such as RAP plans and other things for building your health and wellness skills, your own self-management skills. This is also tied back to the goals that are determined by the individual as you develop your plan of care. So as people develop their plan of care, they're going to outline the big, broad goals, and the peer support services need to be supportive of that. But they also need to emphasize that ability to not only restore skills that maybe they've lost, but build some new skills. As people connect, and one thing that we on the OMH side have really promoted in the last probably 5 years around peer support services is helping them engage and connect in what we call their passion. That thing that once you start talking to someone about it, you can't get them to shut up. Those of you who have a mother like mine who's very proud of her grandchildren, you mention her grandchildren to her and she'll bring out the picture albums and you'll be there for the rest of the day. Those are her passion. There'll be peers that you talk with that may have no affect, no connection, and then suddenly they get it. You trigger something based on their passion, and you really can't get them to stop. So we really want the peer support person to really look at that, understand what that, help the person identify that in themselves, and then help them look at, okay, what kind of goal, what kind of skills do I need to achieve that? If my passion is around computers, what kind of skills do I need to learn to be able to do that? Do I need to learn skills not just about the computer, but maybe skills about personal interaction with others, skills about managing my symptoms so that I can be in a setting with other people and not have my symptoms impact that. So it's using that passion as a vehicle to motivate the individual. That goes back to that engagement piece. Brenda, how do you guys see that from the OASIS side?
So one of the things that I think is really important is that about the peer supports is really helping an individual could get connected to the community, because for some people their community has become just a one-block radius, and this allows them to really get connected to the broader community, as well as building natural resources for themselves. There's so many resources in the community that they need to get connected to, and peers know where the services are. And so other peers can help them connect to the various services. And the other thing that I think is really important is that with peer support and the development of individualized recovery plans, the person begins to take ownership for their recovery. And being able to empower a peer to take ownership of their recovery and really understand how valuable, we understand that the person in recovery is the expert, and they are the ones who are expert on themselves and know exactly what they need. So it's important for us to look at them as the expert, and other peers understand that, and being able to help empower them to move forward.
I think we certainly share that from the mental health side about that, looking at the individual as being the expert on their recovery, and the peer worker that's providing peer support, whether you call them a peer advocate or a peer specialist or whatever name you might give them, that really is the thing that they bring to the table, and the skill set that they will bring to your organization is around the uniqueness of recovery, the ins and outs of recovery, and really what recovery is all about. And we've seen in the mental health side where we've gone from people being stagnant and sort of connected only to their peer group, and maybe they come to a drop-in center or a social club, and that's really the extent of it. They go back to either a small apartment or they go back to a congregate living, but they really kind of move around in this institutional bubble. And we've seen peer support services be able to help people break out of that bubble, engage with the broader community, and once they start doing that, they find people that share that passion that they have, and they connect with them, not based on sharing a mental illness or addiction, but they share a common interest in the community, and it builds so much capital in people to be able to really propel their recovery forward. So what are some of the components that we're talking about? We've got several slides here that will go over the components. The first one is advocacy. And by advocacy, we're talking about helping the individual promote their own needs. So we really are looking at the peer specialist or the peer support provider. Let me change it because you'll see in a minute OASIS and OMH both have different terms that we call them by. But the peer provider is promoting this idea of the individual asserting their own needs and being able to speak up for themselves, but also learning how to give them the direction around where they might need assistance with benefits or entitlements, where they can go, give them guidance for that, linkage to other parts of the system. This is not to be duplicative of case management, but it really is to be about helping the individual speak up and speak for themselves so they become a key component in what we'll talk about in a later webinar about developing that person-centered plan of care. Brenda, I know you guys use peer advocate actually in the title of your certification. How do you guys see advocacy?
So advocacy and giving, someone a voice is so important. And with the OASIS peer advocate, they are able to really begin to help the person really recognize their own voice and develop their own voice and being able to navigate systems and also link to systems. And many times the persons in recovery that are coming through our system, they have so many people pulling them from so many different systems. So they may be pulled from the criminal justice system as well as being pulled from the child welfare system, as well as trying to get their benefits together. And so having someone begin to advocate, and they don't seem to have a voice due to stigma, even going to a medical doctor and advocating for themselves it becomes very difficult and very challenging. So it is important for us, the peer, to help them get a voice and begin to advocate for themselves and be able to navigate the system and link them to the places that they need to be so that they can navigate. So we're looking at this as a very positive component of this service and something that is right up at the top of what we do.
And you'll notice on here there are some things where it looks like the peer specialist or the peer supporter is providing that advocacy for the individual, but it's always with the goal of helping the individual learn self-advocacy. And we have some things in here that are tools for people to be able to speak up and have a voice in their treatment. We've mentioned in the second bullet there the My Psyches, which is a mental health piece about being involved in your treatment planning and promoting your personal wellness and things of that nature. And we have psychiatric advance directives listed as tools that an individual can use to help advocate for themselves when they perhaps are in a crisis situation, but they can plan ahead while they're in a calm state for what to do in a crisis. The next component is outreach and engagement, and we mentioned a little of this earlier, but as we connect with individuals, particularly individuals that are hard to serve, and remember these HCBS services are geared towards individuals who, by the very nature of the way we've identified them, are people with high needs, if you will. They're people whose mental health or addiction symptoms have caused significant impairments in their ability to function in their daily living. And so for that reason, they often are hard to engage in services. They're hard to connect with. So one of the components here is about outreaching with them, connecting with them, providing them not only companionship, but a model. A peer supporter provides a role model. Again, it's that bringing that shared walk of life experience around recovery. It's also about just meeting with them one-on-one, connecting with them, and trying to help them look at services not as a bubble you're going to be trapped in, but as a tool to help you move forward and build your life. And so you see a number of things that we have mentioned here as far as subcomponents of that. Brenda, did you want to add to some of that about how you guys view outreach and engagement?
So outreach and engagement for us is very important. Just to piggyback off of what Joe said, that it is important that individuals see that recovery is possible, that recovery does exist, and give them, a role model for that. But also, outreach and engagement for us is very important because many times when a person is discharged from a detox unit or they go to an emergency room, the connection to the next step for them is very difficult. So this will put in place many times a connection that will help the peer assistant doing a warm handoff to another provider or to the next step that they need to go to. So it's important that this is done, and outreach and engagement is a big part of that.
Right, and one way to maybe conceptualize this too is that as a peer support provider, you're really providing hope. You're holding that candle of that flame of hope that recovery is possible out to the individual and trying to get them to connect with that and light their own spark of hope for recovery within them. Another component here is about developing the use of self-help tools. So I mentioned earlier RAP plans is one that we use a lot on the mental health side. Brenda, I'm sure you guys have some other self-help tools that you guys use on the addiction side as well, correct?
Yes, correct.
And so go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, yes, we have many tools that can be utilized to help direct recovery and really empower the person. And we also, on our side, also have a lot of self-help groups, so 12-step fellowships, but not only just 12-step fellowships, but there are other mutual aid groups. And on the addiction side, we call them mutual aid groups, and that they are there to assist people in different ways. So there may be mutual aid groups that are 12-step fellowships, but there may be other mutual aid groups that are faith-based, other mutual aid groups that are geared towards cognitive behavioral thinking. So it opens up the doors in this self-help and giving the person, also just letting them know that there's mutual aid. So we call it mutual aid because it's important to understand that this is something that you can't do by yourself, but it is something that you can begin to be empowered to move forward and be self-directed.
And when you think about a peer support provider, one of the skill sets that they bring to the table is knowledge of that broad toolbox of all of these self-help tools, whether they're on the addiction side or on the mental health side. In their training and preparation to be a peer support provider, they've had a lot of training around and hand-on usage of many of these different recovery tools. And so they really are the expert, if you will, about the different tools in the toolbox. And what we want to see them do here as a peer support provider is help the individual look at the toolbox and look at their life and say, what is the best one to provide, that kind of mutual support, and I like that term, Brenda, for the individual to connect with the support in the community. Recovery supports are another component. Here we're talking about sort of that life coaching, if you will, for the individual, perhaps even some help with the family members, though we want to make sure we draw a real distinction between that and the service Andy's going to have a webinar on next week about family support. But here we're talking about coaching the individual about how to maybe connect with their family and speak about what kind of support needs they have, providing one-on-one support, often someone who is in a crisis. A peer supporter can be there with them, can provide that one-on-one again, holding out that candle of hope, or that flame of hope that it will get better, this too shall pass, those types of things, and really helping that individual, again, promoting them and providing that safety net under them and encouraging them to become an active part of their own treatment. I know you guys provide a lot of recovery support through your peer advocates, Brenda, and I think they sort of came out of the recovery coaching idea. Isn't that correct?
Yes. So especially with the recovery coaching, it is really to support the person. The recovery coach is a cheerleader, is a motivator, and really is motivating and coaching the individual to really be empowered. Again, I use that term, to be supportive, and also to really begin to help them plan, and I guess back to helping them own their plan. So many times our persons in recovery, they have had to have everybody else dictate their plan, but this also helps them towards person-centered goal planning that is so important, and really building recovery capital and helping them with the various supports to really build recovery capital and coaching them in that direction to build that recovery capital.
I love that term, because really what we're talking about here is that recovery capital. A lot of us have that resiliency that we sort of take for granted. People in recovery often are more attuned to the fact that resiliency is sort of something that they need to build more of, and building that as well as the other elements of recovery capital and social capital are so important.
Yes.
And then lastly, the transitional supports. This is sort of the bridging, and you're going to hear in a minute a case example that involves a lot of some of these bridging activities from one of our providers who does a lot of the peer bridging. But this really is that connection, and Brenda, I think you mentioned this earlier, that connecting when somebody's coming out of different settings. Perhaps they're coming out of a detox or a general emergency room visit or something like that, really helping them make that connection back to home. I think this is really, really important here. I know it is on our side, and I think it's probably also important on your side too. Is that correct?
Yes, very, very much so. Very much so, because people coming from, especially institutions, they may feel lost, and there was a safe place for them in that, possibly in that institution, and now coming out and into this community, it's helping them to also become a part of the community in a very healthy way, which may not have happened previously, connecting them to various community resources that they may not have been connected to before. And you know, so it's so important, because a lot of times when individuals are leaving these situations, they're going right back to the community. And recovery actually takes place in the community. That's where the recovery takes place, in the community, and being able to help them bridge and develop healthy recovery supports and in the community, and get them the things that they need in the community is very vital to their success in recovery and understanding what they need to do to have recovery sustained. And so we were looking for people to enter into long-term recovery, and that they will be able to sustain and maintain their recovery in the community where they live, with all the things that are going around them. So this is important.
One point I want to make here, and you'll notice this in the two notes on the first two bullets, is that, again, we're talking about this discrete service of HCBS peer support. It does get a little bit tricky, because the service provided to them while they're in a jail or an institutional setting is not Medicaid reimbursable. However, the service you provide to them as they come out into the community is. Now, we've done a lot on the mental health side with state-funded peer services, where we've had the ability, because it was state funds, and we had the luxury, if you will, of being able to direct those funds the way we felt appropriate, where that bridger could go in, spend more time with them, meeting with them before they leave. In this HCBS model, the service cannot be provided and build for. Your bridger may go or your bridging activities may involve going and having a meeting with them, so you at least introduce yourself before the person comes out and into the community. But you have to be very careful, and again, that I don't want to get us down that rabbit hole, because Andy's fall series of this will take us down to sort of the nuances of that. But I do want to make people aware that on this discrete HCBS service, you can't bill while the person is in the jail or institutional setting. But certainly you want to connect with them as quickly as possible as they're coming out and provide that assistance, as Brenda so accurately described, about transitioning to the community so that you don't lose people in the gap. We also have the need for crisis support services and pre-crisis planning. Someone may be, I don't like the term, but I'll use it here because I think many of the people on this call will probably understand it. Decompensating, they may be moving towards a crisis. A peer supporter can come in and provide some of that recovery support to the individual, but they can also help the individual in developing plans for crisis diversion. What to do if you are beginning to feel yourself moving into an escalating crisis, so that you become an active participant in your planning. That's one of the pieces of a RAP plan about how to engage that. But they also could perhaps even provide some peer support to the person in their home while they're dealing with a crisis situation. And again, perhaps even in a crisis, so that we can, again, we want to help keep the person in the community, not see them have to go to an emergency room or a detox or a residential setting just because something happened and that's the only other option. So this gives us, again, back to the toolbox idea, a bigger array of tools to help people stay in the community. Brenda, do you want to mention anything about how you guys expect the peer supporters to help promote relapse prevention plans?
So I believe that one of the things that's important to understand is that for the first time, we will be able to have peer support outside of a clinic. Currently, it's only available within the four walls of a clinic. So this is an exciting aspect to us, because now we can begin to go meet a person at a diner, meet a person in their community, go to meet a person at their home or wherever they are, and begin to provide some support for them in that. And that will help with the relapse, because planning that they will be doing. So for us, this is an important service and very exciting for us, because this will enable us to actually do some hands-on work with a person outside in the community where they're doing their recovery, and beginning to help them develop the plans that they need and realize the things that they need to put in place to prevent relapse.
Okay. Kind of becoming mindful of time, so I want to kind of speed us up a little bit here. There are some billing regulations and sort of business rules that are related to providing peer support services. One is that these are to be face-to-face services. We expect them to be mostly in the community. As Brenda mentioned, this isn't about people coming to the peer supporter. It's the peer supporter going out to the individual. Their home, maybe even in a homeless shelter. Connecting with them if they're homeless is a very key part of peer support. It will be based on their need and subject to review of the goals. So this is going to be connected back to that individual care planning. And we do have some limitations around this. One is that the limit is 500 hours in a calendar year. If you figure that out, that's close to 10 hours a week of peer support. That's a lot of peer support. So there's the ability to provide a lot of peer support. I'm going to ask Brenda in just a second to speak to the second bullet about how OASIS, because you guys have it in the state plan as well as HCBS. We don't on the OMH side. So I'm going to ask you to speak to that, if you would, Brenda.
Yes. So it's important to note that individuals receiving peer services in an OASIS licensed program cannot also receive HCBS peer services at the same time. They can receive only one peer service at a time. So we just be mindful if they're in your clinic and in your program and outpatient program and they are receiving services, peer support services there, they cannot receive HCBS service, peer support services as well. There cannot be a duplication of services.
And we've mentioned previously the institutional exclusion. The final one here is that you're going to be billing for these services in 15-minute increments, and you can bill up to 16 of those units, which really comes out to 4 hours per day or per claim, and usually a claim is per day. So you can do up to 16 units or 4 hours as a maximum in a day with an individual. So just because it's a 15-minute increment unit and you look at the billing chart and you realize that that is only 15 minutes, but you're not stuck to just 15 minutes a day. You can go up to a maximum of 4 hours a day. Let's talk a little bit about qualifications, and Brenda, I'm going to defer to you on the OASIS qualifications, but the individual has to be certified. Before we moved into Medicaid, we've all kind of taken the look of, well, we'll know a qualified peer support provider when we see one. That's nice when you have the luxury of state funds, but Medicaid has a lot of regulations. Most of these were outlined in a state Medicaid director letter that came out in 2007, where the state is required to develop processes for determining who is a qualified provider. So on the OMH side, we have developed a process called Certified Peer Specialist. To be a certified peer specialist, an individual has to gain a body of knowledge either by going to the Academy of Peer Support online training or going to on-the-job training or in-person training in the community. But wherever they get that body of knowledge, they have to come back to the APS site for the actual testing so that we can assure that they have gotten the same body of knowledge in these core skill areas, whether they got it in the community, lived experience, or whether they did it all in the online or some kind of combination thereof. They also have to show that they have some qualified work experience, so there's a practicum involved that they have to go through. They also have to be a person with lived experience, so to be a peer specialist on the mental health certification, you have to self-identify publicly as a person with lived experience, and you have to give an attestation that you have that experience, that you've used that experience to help others, and then in addition to your, as we said, your qualifications of skill learning, you have to have applied that and show documented, basically supervised practicum of 2,000 hours on the mental health side to get a certification. We have a process in there for a provisional certification for people who just have the qualified skill set training but are still working on their supervised experience, so they can get that and still bill Medicaid while they're doing it. So there are a number of pieces to that. Anybody that wants that, I can certainly share more of that with you and share the website for our certification board that is handling those. Most of those certifications will begin coming out on the mental health side in the next couple of weeks. People have been applying since March, and I believe they are quickly moving towards the first batch moving out and hitting the street within the next 2 weeks. So Brenda, you want to talk a little about how you guys, what you guys consider a certified peer advocate?
Okay, yes. So for OASIS, a certified peer advocate generally will take 30 hours of what a C-card training and recovery coaching. And they will take the 30 hours, and there are also additional coursework that they have to do in ethics, and there are some other courses that they have to take an additional 16 hours in that, and some other courses that they have to take to make sure they have a well-rounded view of recovery coaching and peer advocacy. And then we have actually in OASIS, there are 2 boards. There is the New York Certification Board and the New York Certification Association that an individual can go and apply to become a certified peer advocate. The New York certification, you can go to either website and you can find out what they require and the cost of applying for the certification. It also requires a certain number of hours of volunteer service, and I believe it's about 500 hours of volunteer service, and some of that service has to be supervised. So it requires supervised service, and then you can sit for the exam so that you can become a certified peer advocate. We've been in the process of this for now a little bit over a year and a half. We have some individuals that are certified peer advocates and are working as certified peer advocates. There's definitely, you can go to the OASIS website and you will be able to find out additional information on the certified peer advocate and what is needed to qualify to be a certified peer advocate. One of the things that differs from OMH is that the person should have lived experience, but that is not the only thing. There are those who are family members in recovery that can become a certified peer advocate, or you have had a large number of time working with individuals who are in recovery, so it is open to also family members in recovery as well as others that can become certified peer advocates. So that is what we do here at OASIS.
So you can see the peer advocate versus the peer specialist. There are some differences that Brenda just pointed out, but the similarities are both of these individuals come to the table with having gone through a course of knowledge development and then of practical experience application and then testing to show that they have the qualified skills before they are allowed to practice this craft, if you will, and bill Medicaid. The other piece is that in accordance with that Medicaid director letter we mentioned, supervision has to be provided. We have here that it has to be a licensed behavioral health practitioner. We are working as the state to give guidance around how that needs to be operationalized, because the directive to the state is that the state has, that state Medicaid director letter is that it has to be supervised by a practitioner as defined by the state. So we, the state, still have some guidance, and this will come out more in the fall training that Andy was talking about earlier. We do look for no more than a 1 to 20 ratio when you're looking at cases. And this particular peer service is not a group setting. This is a face-to-face peer service, individual to individual. This is not peers leading groups. So with that, Andy, I'm going to turn it back to you. Is there anything I need to do on this end to give you the ball?
No, you're all good. And Joe, I want to thank both you and Brenda for really an excellent presentation of really giving us a very thorough understanding of exactly, as of right now, kind of where peer services are for HCBS. Morgan, I'm going to ask you to unmute Tanya from NIAPRIS, who's going to walk through the OMH case example. And I just want to highlight for both Tanya and Debbie that we are running a little bit behind schedule, so we're going to shoot for about 5 to 7 minutes or so we have 15 minutes at the end for questions. So thanks so much. And Tanya, I'm going to pass it on to you, and your case example's up on the screen for everybody to see.
Thank you. Good morning. So through an existing contract that we have with a managed care company, we got a referral for a young woman who was homeless at the time of engagement and also pregnant. She was sort of cycling in and out of crisis care, in and out of various shelters, although she had a telephonic case manager and also a case manager through the ACS system because she herself was in foster care at one point. She was not engaging in services, not engaging in prenatal care, and was sort of bouncing around between various hospital settings, different family members' homes who were actively using, and various shelters. And so our bridger was able to engage her following a hospitalization. We were able to get her into a more long-term shelter situation, while we also worked on getting her supported housing and a more permanent housing situation for both her and her child. We did get her to engage in prenatal care, went with her to the hospital at the time that she did give birth to the baby, and she was discharged from the hospital without any sort of supplies for the child. So the Bridger worked with her telephonic case manager through her Medicaid provider and through the foster care case manager that she had to get various things donated, including a crib. We got her enrolled in WIC program for food for the baby. We got clothing for the child. We made sure that she was working with her to keep her appointments, because now she was also in the ACS system as a possible risk to have her own child taken away from her, and really just stabilize the housing situation and the food situation and get her various benefits. A couple of months into this relationship, she was then kicked out of that shelter because it came to their attention that once she had the child, she was ineligible for that shelter setting. So we rented a U-Haul, went and picked her and the child up, put her stuff in storage, got her to an ACS shelter where she was able to stay with the baby. We continued working with her on the supported housing application, and eventually we were able to work with her and her two different case managers to get her into a long-term foster care situation with a family that was able to take both her and her child, so that she was able to both learn some parenting skills and have the nurturance that both she and the baby needed. And that's, I think, so I pass it back to you, Andy?
Got that. I was on mute, but I was talking.
Okay.
I was talking
Okay.
while I was on mute. I just put myself on mute. So thank you so much, Tanya. That was a really good illustration of using peer services to get people connected, not only to services, but also connected to the kind of supports in the community that they're going to really need to enter into recovery. So with that, we are going to pass it on to Debbie Panton from VIP to talk about this from a substance use side. So if we can unmute Debbie, and we're going to hope that her phone works well. Debbie, are you there? Debbie, we can't hear you. So we have somehow lost connection to Debbie, although we do get the background noise. So with that, I think we're going to jump into Q&A. If Debbie's able to call in on a landline, then we'll pull her up to do the OASS example, but I don't want to lose out on questions because we've got a tremendous number of questions that have come in. So if we're able to connect with Debbie, we will we'll do that. But in the meantime, we're going to jump into Q&A. Before we do that, I just want to highlight a couple quick things. I want to recommend that all folks, based on some of the questions, a lot of folks have done this already, but all folks, if you haven't, you should go online and look at the HCBS Manual. The link is here, the HARP Billing Manual, which is here as well as the fee schedule and rate codes that are all available online. We strongly recommend you go and look at that. It has a lot of what we presented today comes from that, but we do want to very, very much make sure that people take a look at those things as well. If you weren't at our training on June 15th, we really walked through at a high level just HCBS services globally, the workflow and those kinds of things. The video is not up online, but the slides are, so strongly recommend that you go and take a look at that. The webinar series is what we're doing today. We are doing a Managed Care 101 webinar. We had one last week and an identical one coming up on the 20th, which is now full. But both have been recorded and will be put up online, as will today's webinar, which is being recorded and will be put back up online. So if you have staff who weren't able to attend today, please make sure that you let them know and they can go up online and view it online. We're doing contracting stuff, and also just to highlight, it hasn't been announced formally yet, but we're going to be doing a training on all the billing protocols on August 7th for folks in New York City, and we'll be announcing that shortly. One other thing I just want to say that literally came through my email as we were talking is the application to be an HCBS provider for the rest of state, so outside of New York City. That application went out this morning. We'll get it published on our website today or shortly, and it's on OMH's website. I imagine it'll be on OASIS's website as well. So if you're not in New York City, which I imagine many folks are not, please go take a look at that. It's going to be really critical that you apply to be an HCBS service provider, because you have to be designated to be an HCBS service provider before you can deliver HCBS services. So with that, here is the final thing. It's in the slides, so you can look through these, but here's the rest of these webinars for each of the rest of the webinars for each of the other service packets. So we've got one on Friday on family support, one next week on all the employment and education HCBS services, on the 24th for non-medical transportation, crisis and respite on the 29th, and then psych rehab on the 31st. So we'll be doing those. I strongly encourage you to sign up for that. With that, you can read this slide as we go forward, just where to get all the information. It's all on our website at MCTAC.org. And if you have questions, you can always email them to mctac.info@nyu.edu. And with that, we are going to move into questions and answers. I would ask, Dan is going to give me questions, and we are going to answer them. Okay. When do you expect to receive the granular level guidance on how to operate this and other HCBS services? We'll be providing that in the fall. I anticipate it probably will be mid to late October to start. We probably won't do it in the first couple of weeks of the new rollout because it will lead, people are going to be so busy in those first couple of weeks. So we'll be doing, it's likely to be in person in the city to help HCBS providers really get ready to deliver HCBS services starting on January 1, when these services will actually start rolling out as January 1. I think we got that. Okay, so I got a question for Joe and Brenda. What is the definition of a peer? How far into recovery do they need to be in order to be effective? Also, will our understanding of peers being individuals with lived experiences in mental health and substance abuse evolve as we think cross systems and move into physical health? So I'll pass that to Joe and or Brenda to answer, and if we can just unmute them so they can talk.
Me? Can you hear me?
Oh, there you go. Yep.
Okay, great. We actually are, I'm going to take the cross systems piece first, because we're actually doing a lot between OMH and OASIS with a federal grant called Brass Tacks, Bringing Recovery Services to Scale, where we're looking at sort of how we can learn from each other and how we can do more cross systems collaboration. There also is a move towards the cross systems approach when you look at whole health peer services that the National Council has been promoting. So there are a number of issues that we're looking at in that, and I would hope that we evolve over time as we move forward. As far as how far into recovery a person needs to be in order to be effective, we don't have a set length of time. We do say on the mental health side you cannot currently be hospitalized because we're looking at you can't be sort of in the midst of dealing with your own issues in order to deal with somebody else. But we do look at the individual having developed that learned knowledge, that they're past their sort of latest serious episode, and they've gotten some recovery under their belt. Typically, you would like to see maybe 6 months or so plus, but that's just a guide. We really are looking at it on a case-by-case basis where the certification board looks at sort of the totality of the application. Has the person learned the skill sets they need to learn? And again, we've got a 12-month practicum in there, so people are able to move through that. And as far as the definition of a peer, we define a peer on the mental health side as a person who publicly identifies as having utilized these services, having been diagnosed with a condition, and utilizing these services to overcome the challenges that come with that diagnosis.
So for OASIS, it's very similar to OMH in that there is no set time period that a person has to be in recovery. Just, again, they cannot be currently in treatment. They need to be have completed treatment. The definition of a peer is just someone who has had lived experience. I think our definition is not as rigid in that regard, but the person must have had some type of lived experience or have been affected or by someone who has had that lived experience in order to be a certified peer advocate. But it's important to have that lived experience in order to do that.
Right. Thank you guys both for taking that question. The next question is, and it's again for Joe and Brenda. The HCBS Manual states that, and you guys also said this, peer services are face-to-face only. Will you be able to bill for peer services that are provided via the phone? And then there was a comment along with that, just because in rural situations, sometimes there's a lot of, phone contact is often as critical as the in-person contact.
Yeah, we've looked at that, and I think certainly to some degree we'll probably be able to allow some phone interaction. That's still sort of a work in progress. We don't want, I think what we want to avoid, though, is the person that's providing the peer support doing it all over the phone. So to the extent that you're reaching out to somebody and making a connection with them, yes, that's important. We also realize that that's going to have a different meaning as we go to rest of state versus what we're dealing with first up in New York City. But I think it's something we'll have to be issuing guidance from the state level to the plans on that.
Perfect. And then so next question is, will you be explaining the provider process for obtaining HCBS services upon HARP approval? Yes, we've already done the workflow on that. It might change a little bit, but you can look at the HCBS workflow that's available online at MCTAC.org. Okay, so Brenda, this is a question for Brenda. Is there a method to determine if individuals are receiving OASAS state plan peer services to avoid providing HCBS covered peer services on top of that?
So one of the things that will take place is that the insurance companies also will be mindful of that as they pay for certain services. But at this point, it is just really getting the message out, as well as making sure that there's questions being asked. I think that it's important also to make sure that the providers know who is receiving HCBS services. There is supposed to be a coordination of care so that will not take place where somebody does not know that the person is not receiving HCBS services, and as there is a coordination of care, that should help to assist in not having the services, double services taking place.
Great, thanks so much. And then also just to highlight that there is going to be an integrated plan of care which covers all the services the person's receiving, and so people will be able to reference that as well, and that's supposed to be made available to all providers. But really the plan is going to be responsible, as Brenda said, for making sure that happens. So there's a question, will peers be required to work with case managers, care managers, so the focus stays on the care plan? Yeah, I think it's just kind of inherently built into the process, so the focus will stay on the one integrated care plan. One question I'm just going to highlight, but we'll come back to in the future. Can you expand upon the MyPsyches concept? What tools are needed? I think we'll address that in the more specific in-person training in the fall. Are HCBS services only made available for HARP-eligible clients? Yes, they are. So HCBS services are only available to clients who are in a HARP or an HIV SNP. And then those HCBS services are only available to those clients who have undergone the inter-I assessment, and the inter-I assessment has indicated that they are eligible for HCBS services. So there will be, so the first cut is you have to be in a HARP or an HIV SNP. The second cut is that after the inter-I assessment, the inter-I assessment has to determine that you are eligible for HCBS services on top of that. Just give me one moment as I line up the next question. So Brenda, there's a question around whether there's a link to the peer certification section of the OASAS website, whether or not it's on the website. Do we know if there's a direct link to that training or that certification program?
There is supposed to be direct links that you can go to the OASIS website. If not, you can go to the ASAP website, and you can find the link to the certification, one of the certification association of the board, and then there is one of them is associated with the Florida Certification Board, and you can go onto their website. But you should be able to find the links on OASIS.
And similarly, we have links on the OMH website as well.
Fantastic. And then one other thing that we're going to take a brief break from questions. We were able to get Debbie Panton on a landline. The other line didn't work, so we were able to get Debbie Panton on a landline. So we're going to go back to Debbie, who's going to walk us through the OASIS case example really quickly. And Debbie, thank you so much for kind of working with us and getting us through there.
No problem. Thank you, guys. Again, sorry about that. Thanks, we were able to make this work. So on the substance abuse side, the example that we want to share is pretty much one that comes from a lot of the peer work that VIP has been doing over several years, specifically around its HIV work, but more recently we're doing some peer work related to a grant that we have through SAMHSA. So from there is the example that I'm going to give. And this is an example of a 58-year-old female who's been diagnosed with substance abuse disorder, specifically opiate, and she's been involved in our outpatient medication-assisted program since about 2011, thereabouts. She has relatively no supports and has been engaged in care on and off with some interruptions. But anyway, you know, she's living with her sister, and that's about the only support. Very sort of isolated, not really connecting a lot with her peers in the program even. And on top of that, within the last couple of years, she's been diagnosed also with breast cancer, and she is HIV positive. So at the point about 2 years ago, or a little under a year ago, I should say, really, she was referred to our care coordination program. And we have this system here at VIP. It's more or less an interagency care coordination, interagency case conferencing system where clients who are in one or two, two or more of our programs and their cases reached a certain level of, of concern, these clients are placed into those programs for coordination. So quite, naturally they were placed, this woman was placed into that program. And from there she was identified as a good candidate to receive the peer advocacy and peer navigation type services. The peer went out to her home and really encouraged her to sort of, re-engage in primary care and also, be more engaged in her substance abuse care, which she followed up on. The peers worked with her a lot and gave her a lot of moral support and also, helped connect her back to the community, identified for her various kinds of resources that she needed and stuff to go through this process. Successfully enough, this client was able to get preparation and for her surgery, which she did have a mastectomy, which the surgery was very successful. And it's really helped to re-engage her back into primary care. I think for those of us who've been in the field for quite some time or even not so long, we can say that this peer service was a really strong one that helped this person to stay connected to care and really have her alive today, to the point that she is now being considered for HIV housing in one of our housing programs here. So, all in all, we think this is a good way that peer services help support her, and as HCBS comes along, other similar clients can benefit from this. Okay, thanks, Andy. Andy, did you unmute yourself, or?
Okay, I'm finally unmuted. My phone was started muting me over and over again. So Debbie, thank you so much for that example. I think it was a really excellent example. We got a couple quick questions for Tanya from NIAPRIS. One, and I'm just going to read them out together because they're similar. In the example of OMH peer services, a lot of time was spent finding and accessing resources. Was this all done face-to-face, or was some of it done by phone? And then the second question is, where did the money come from for the U-Haul, the storage unit rental, those kinds of other services that weren't directly billable?
So it was not all done face-to-face, but I mean, moving as I think Joe specified before. So, you know, this is outside of the limits of what HCBS can provide. So we're going to have to make some changes to, under the HCBS services, some changes to based on what is and is not billable. So some of it was done telephonically, but a fair amount of it was done face-to-face with the individual. The money is part of the, again, this is outside of HCBS. It's part of discretionary funds that we have in the existing contract that would not be included under the HCBS services. So again, it's a little outside of what will be allowed to be billed for HCBS. Our existing contract does allow for these things.
Okay, that's great. And I think it also highlights that there will be some braiding of funding, that many of the agencies providing peer services also receive services from other sources to provide similar types of services, or for some of these wraparound funds. And so I think really successful agencies will be able to integrate those funds in so that they can really, you know, make most use of both the HCBS services, but what other funds may be available as well. Please clarify, can peers provide group services? So I believe, Joe, I'll just give that to you. I think it's a pretty straightforward one.
Yeah, they cannot be provided this service as a group, but as you just mentioned, Andy, there are other funding services for peers providing group and peer group, but this is a one-on-one service, not a group service.
Great. And then one question for Brenda. Brenda had said that as a peer specialist cannot be currently enrolled in treatment, and we have a couple questions just to clarify that as well.
Okay, so just as I think that Joe has stated, you know, there is a need to make sure that if there is a peer that is going to be assisting someone else, that they have some recovery capital and they're pretty steady in their recovery, and so it's important that that has been established. So as we move forward, things will be greater defined, but at this time, we're looking at, you know, people who have completed their treatment process, that they are able to begin this. There is no limit on how long a person has been in recovery, but that is something that we're looking at.
Okay. Andy, I would like to make sure we clarify that that is on the OASIS side. The only limit about active treatment on the mental health side is you can't actively be hospitalized. You know, many people that are peer specialists on the mental health side continue their own treatment, but we want them to be at a point in their treatment where they're able to assist others.
All right, thank you so much for that clarification. Can a recipient of HCBS service also receive health home care coordination without duplication of services? So I'll take this one. So all clients who are going to be in a HARP are eligible, all clients who are in a HARP are eligible for health home care coordination, and by their very nature, that is the pool that's going to receive HCBS services. So all clients who are receiving HCBS services are going to be eligible for health home care coordination. Now, a client could say they don't want health home care coordination, but they do want HCBS services, and that would be okay. But every single client who would be eligible for HCBS services will also be eligible for health home care coordination. And then one of the questions around the website Brenda mentioned, where you can find peer certification requirements. It sounded like she said ASAC. Brenda, I think you may have said ASAP.
Correct, ASAP, A-S-A-P. That's the
that's John Capola's, right.
Yes, station, yes.
And then HCBS will be using OASAS and OMH peers. Is there any specific requirements for having a certain number of peers? So I guess the question is there a certain minimal threshold for the number of peers that can work in any given program? I'll give this to Joe and Brenda, but my sense is there's no minimum threshold or maximum threshold. It's just the number of people who can meet the caseload requirements and deliver the service.
Right, it would be based on the caseload.
Right, correct. For OASIS the same way. There's no limit.
Oh. And I would also say to folks that they should be mindful as, you know, this process will scale up slowly as, you know, people get assessed and people become eligible for services. So people are going to really want to be very careful in their business planning to think through thoughtfully how they add staff to this process. Just want to clarify that members cannot receive OMH peer support and HCBS services. My understanding, Joe, I'll let you clarify this, is that there isn't this prohibition on the OMH side, it's only on the OHS side, correct?
That is correct. However, we don't want people double dipping, but the way we fund programs, we're not going to take away the funding for that larger program. This will add funding for individuals to sort of braid into your program funding. So we can get more into that in the fall.
Okay, great. So for example, if somebody's receiving services from a peer in a PROS program, they could continue to receive HCBS peer services because those are different things. But if you were getting deficit funded to provide individual peer services, you wouldn't also be getting those same individual peer services from HCBS. Is that about right?
Well, yes, the PROS service is a peer providing a psych rehab service.
Right.
The deficit funding, if you're at an agency that's getting deficit funding for peer services, as long as this is allowing you to use that deficit funding to expand your non-Medicaid individuals, and this money is covering your Medicaid individuals, you'll continue to be fine. And as I said, this could get us down a rabbit hole real quick. So I want to maybe punt this one to the fall session where we get a little bit deeper in.
Absolutely, and just for the folks on the phone, we'll absolutely get into a lot more detail as we get closer to December 1st on this. We've got time for a couple more questions. Certified peer specialists must be supervised by a licensed behavioral health practitioner. Please define supervise. What level of supervision is required? Joe and Brenda, you may want to take that broadly, and we'll get more into the weeds in the fall, but just broadly to highlight that.
Yeah, because we're looking at how to operationalize that. We're not saying that supervision has to be sort of the daily hands-on experience. We obviously want that supervision loop on the mental health side to include a experienced peer specialist, so there can be the need for having sort of a consultative model for the supervision. So we're teasing out the guidance around that. It's just that there has to be that practitioner in the loop, and we'll be also giving, as we tease that out, more definition about what that looks like. But the individual level, what CMS sort of envisions here is that somewhere in the loop there is a behavioral health practitioner that's sort of generally overseeing everything that's being done because, again, Medicaid is paying for essentially clinical type services, and this is an expansion.
And just for folks on the phone, we will do additional training in the fall that will cover both utilization management and credentialing. So we'll get into some of these issues as well in that training, which will be more broad than just HCBS services, but we'll also be very specific on these types of things. And then we'll do some of this when we do the in-person training in the fall. Yeah. Somebody just asked real quickly where to find the HCBS Manual, Heart Billing Manual. They're both available on OMH and OHS's website. They're also in these slides, which are available on MCTAC.org and available on our website as well.
Andy, if I could add one thing on the supervision that folks could look at, a state that has a pretty good supervision model that we're trying to learn some from would be Pennsylvania. So you could look at sort of the supervision model that they have available there.
Fantastic. That's a really good point. So I think we have actually reached the end of our time. So I know we didn't get to every question, but hopefully we got to enough of a broad base of them to kind of flush that out. I will just highlight a couple things before we end up. First of all, we are going to be offering more in-depth training. In the fall, so keep an eye out for that. This webinar was recorded today, and this and the slides will be available on our website, MCTAC.org, in the next 24 to 48 hours, but the slides are already up there now. If you haven't already, I strongly encourage you to sign up for the additional HCBS webinars that are available. If you have staff who didn't sign up today, take advantage of the recording, use that with them. The website for ASAP is asapnys.org. So you can access that with the website that Brenda was referring to. ASAP is asapnys.org, so you can take advantage of that. I want to thank all of our presenters for hanging with us today and really, I think, presenting kind of an excellent overview of peer services under HCBS. Please join in for the rest of these over the next month. We'll be covering all the HCBS services at the same level. I want to thank all the participants today for really for joining today, and hopefully you found it helpful. Please feel free to email in additional questions to mctac.info@nyu.edu, and we look forward to speaking with many of you later this week and many others of you over the course of the next month and months as we go forward and get ready for this launch. So thanks very much, everybody.